Before I kick off the webinar, let me just go through just a few housekeeping rules. Participants are automatically muted, but we do really encourage you to submit your questions and comments in the Q&A box throughout the whole webinar. And we'll try to address some of them in real time, but also we'll make time at the end of the hour to address as many of those questions as we can and discuss them with our speakers. The webinar will be recorded, and we'll share it also with those who couldn't join and all of you after today, so that we allow as many people to hear the insights and take advantage of today's discussion. And if you have any additional questions, please do get in touch. You see my colleague Megan's email here, and also want to take the opportunity to really thank her and the team for the work that's behind today's session, including the report that we're presenting and talking about today. Let me introduce myself. My name is Christian Kaufholz. I'm the head of community engagement and impact at the Global Plastic Action Partnership here at the World Economic Forum. And good morning from New York, where I'm based here in the New York office of the Forum. The topic of today's webinar, Circular Solutions for a Global Plastic Treaty, really, of course, ultimately seeks to talk to the crisis that we're facing on plastic pollution. And I don't think I need to go into that topic further, but the focus really today is on solutions. And we'll hear from very exciting speakers as well in the work that we've done in that space, to hear from private sector innovation across the board, across regions, the value chain, from big companies to small companies, and a lot of collaborative efforts across the value chain and across different partners to bring about solutions to this important topic. This all happens against the backdrop, of course, of the Global Plastic Treaty under negotiations within a very ambitious time window of 2 years, now going in November into the final negotiation round at INC 5 as member states prepare for those negotiations. And what we really try to do is to highlight solutions from the private sector, as I said, a diversity of solutions that can really inform also or inspire some of the provisions that are under negotiation for the treaty. And in that spirit, we've worked with KPMG and are very grateful for that collaboration to publish a report recently that highlights some of those solutions and in terms of case studies, but also draws some insights from them and how they can inform the Global Plastic Treaty negotiations. And so big thank you to KPMG, and in particularly Susanne Koper, who is the Director for Circular Economy and Product Decarbonization at KPMG International, who's worked with us at the Forum as a project fellow over the last year to work with our partners and put together this report that we just launched. And she'll talk about that a little bit right after I finish this introduction. So that'll be the next segment to hear the insights and key takeaways from that work. After that, we'll have a very exciting panel with some of the case study solution providers featured in the report to give us a flavor of the diversity and the inspiration that comes from those private sector solutions. And as I said before, we will reserve some time at the end for Q&A. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Susanne to kick us off with some key insights from the great work that KPMG has been leading. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. And yeah, let's dive into the main findings of the report. So with the Global Plastics Treaty coming up, we wanted to analyze what solutions are already out there and what we can learn from these solutions if we want to mainstream those circular solutions to tackle plastic pollution. So for this, we set out a survey and we asked for case study submissions around the different topics that were related back then to the zero graph. And we received about 54 case study submissions, analyzed about 100 surveys, and conducted more than 30 interviews with case study providers, where we asked questions like, what are the key success factors that enabled your solutions? What barriers did you have to overcome? What would be needed to scale your solution? And how do you think that the global plastics treaty can support this?
Excuse me, Susanne, the sound is a little bit echoey. I don't know whether you can adjust it somehow, or if not, slow down so that the echo doesn't interfere too much. Thank you.
Okay. Is it better like this?
If you can move closer to the mic, maybe it helps.
So let me see. Does this work better? Or... I don't know what, yeah, how I can further change that.
Maybe if you slow down, I think it'll be fine. We can hear you, most of it.
Okay. So then if we look into the case study submissions, we see a nice distribution in terms of size of the organizations that were behind the solution. Roughly a quarter of these solutions is developed by multinational companies, and another quarter by small-scale startups, and the rest ranged in between. Around half of these solutions have been implemented in at least one country, a quarter in 2 to 10 countries, and also almost another quarter was implemented in more than 11 countries. And also, if we look at the geographical distribution of the case studies that we received, we see a nice spread, although missing out a bit on the Pacific. And please note that solutions can be, of course, when they are implemented in more than one country, also be implemented in more than one region.
Sorry, the sound is really not great. So what I would suggest is that maybe we move ahead with the panel for now, and then you come back after the panel to continue with the insights. Does that work?
Yes.
Great. Sorry about that, but we'll get it fixed, and maybe just switch the order around because that will allow us to hear Susanne more clearly afterwards. So with that, may I invite the panelists to come on camera, and we have a very exciting and diverse cast here with us today, and let me briefly introduce them. So we have Pierre Paslier from Notpla. He's the co-CEO based in the UK. And we have Sonia Ventosa Garcia, who's Group Public Affairs, Communications and Sustainability Manager at Equatorial Coca-Cola Bottling Company, based in Morocco. I welcome also Bintang Ekananda from Alner, which is a startup based in Indonesia, co-founder and CEO. As well as last not but least, Laurent Besson, who's the general manager from PT Veolia Services, also in Indonesia. Thank you, all of you, for being here. It's great to have you, and all of your collaborations and solutions have been featured by the report. But this is an opportunity to delve a bit deeper and hear from you directly, and also how some of those solutions interrelate. So maybe I'll first turn to Pierre, which, I mean, you have a startup that's very much focused on sustainable packaging solutions, in particularly seaweed-based substitutions for single-use plastic packaging. And would love to hear from you a little bit, because you're in that alternative and substitute material space. What are sort of the main challenges to actually getting these materials on the market, and standards and definitions for these materials, or also their impacts, are always top of mind questions that come also up in the treaty negotiations. So if you can speak a little bit to that as well, that would be great. Pierre, over to you.
Thank you very much. And really happy to be able to use our case study as a bit of a, hopefully an example of how to accelerate innovation on this space. So maybe one thing worth highlighting is that actually last October, we became the first novel material that was validated as plastic-free by the Dutch government. And that was with the backdrop of the Single-Use Plastic Directive, which was one of the first kind of directives that really introduced a clear definition of what is a plastic polymer versus a non-plastic polymer. And so I think that's been really useful progress from a legislation point of view on talking about clear standards and definitions to be on one side or the other. And I think when we talk about challenges in this industry, one of the biggest challenge has been the lack of clear and consistent definitions, which have led to a lot of greenwashing and claims of being natural, plastic-free, plant-based, whatever we want to call it, without necessarily substantiating really what is kind of behind. And so Plastic Directive in 2019 introduced the two main, the two concepts for kind of the two criteria for defining what is the difference between plastic polymers and non-plastic polymers. The first one being that nature is already used to. And the second one, you can't chemically modify something that you find in nature. If that human chemical modification changes kind of the chemistry of the material, it's no longer a natural polymer. Those criteria have been able to create a new category of natural polymers, not chemically modified, that becomes aspirational for the industry, and therefore to kind of create a bit of a separation and an incentive for innovation. And so for us, it took 9 months to prove that we were indeed plastic free. It was a bit of a first. As of now, the Dutch government hasn't yet found another solution at scale that was kind of right, kind of following these guiding principles. And I think that by creating this clear aspirational category, we're going to see a bigger drive for innovation and make more solutions available to other companies that are kind of today using plastic, but could substitute them with a natural polymer.
Great, thank you, Pierre. And of course, that's very groundbreaking. Also, the example from the Dutch government in terms of the certification. How realistic or feasible is sort of taking that best practice or that conversation, I guess, to a regional or global level, including in the context of the treaty? What's sort of your dream scenario there?
Yeah, so for me, I think that if we don't have a strong definition of plastic in a global plastics treaty, we are kind of going to have a missed opportunity to be really precise in how we are targeting this problem. So I think for us, ideally, I think the two criteria definition that the Single-Use Plastic Directive has been kind of using is the appropriate one to really talk about those natural polymers that are not chemically modified as non-plastic. I think any other polymers should be considered plastic. There's different roles played by different level of kind of synthesization of the polymers, but I think that we need to be really clear on that definition of plastic. I think on the flip side, it doesn't always matter if we're talking about plastic or not. When end of life is the primary concern, there is obviously kind of the need for very strong definition. Have also been very loose concepts that have kind of allowed a lot of additives and a lot of kind of microplastics to still be labeled as kind of biodegradable. So I think we need both kind of strong definition at origin stage and at kind of end of life. And obviously, when we are kind of talking about new materials, to update a little bit the mix of the classic materials that have been kind of in the space for the last 100 years, there's always the risk of kind of environmental concern. So we need to have like strong holistic life cycle analysis of kind of like those materials so that we know that like we're not creating the next kind of like problematic set of kind of like extractive practices. And that's where, for example, seaweed is ideally placed in our opinion to kind of like really have that kind of like large scale potential. But yeah, we can't let kind of like ourselves pick the next material if it has some other bad consequences.
Great. No, thanks for getting us started with that example, and maybe turning to Sonia next. Of course, we talked about very innovative materials. Sonia, you'll speak more to the advances you've made on bottle-to-bottle recycling in Morocco. Probably you'll talk about materials that maybe have not been around for hundreds of years, but for longer, like PET, where some of the questions around standardization and so on have been worked on for much longer. But would love to hear from you about what collaborations you were able to put together to really move from talking to action in terms of putting together the first bottle-to-bottle recycling solution in Morocco. So Sonia, over to you next.
Thank you so much, Christian. And it's an honor to be here and also be part of the selected cases of this report. And congratulations for making it happen. In our case, in SCCBC, we are a bottler in North and West Africa. And 3 years ago, we developed a new approach for our sustainability strategy. Now it's called 2030 ESG Impact Strategy. And one of the initiatives that we put in place, it's what we call a strategic partnerships roadshow, because we realized if we wanted to really achieve the 2030 target, we could only do it with more people, let's say, with more partners, because they were ambitious, especially in developing countries. So there is no way you can achieve our target in packaging is 50% recycled PET in our packaging, and we cannot do that alone. We need different players in the value chain to be able to achieve that. So we started to engage with different stakeholders who potentially could be partners for us, and that very importantly share our vision on topics such as circular economy. No? And we were looking for partners that either could help us on more impact, more capabilities, or financing as well. No? And this project that we highlighted here in this report is called the Bottle-to-Bottle Project, and is a multi-stakeholder collaboration funded by the European Union and the Finnish government. And we have partners like UNIDO, Chatham House, Circular Economy, and local recyclers, local partners in Morocco. And for the purpose of changing the system of the circular economy in the country. No? And let's be honest, it's not an easy journey. It's been already the first year that has passed with more than 10 partners. But honestly, you create magic. What you create, if you are, let's say, willing to have some compromises from each of the sides, but you really committed all the parties on the journey together, it's going to have a magnified impact. No? And then you gain a network of incredible support, access to knowledge, and a robust and far-reaching project. No? That alone yourself would be completely impossible. So I would say to other private companies, perhaps listening to this webinar, that we should take the risk, because there is not much we can do alone as private companies, especially in some markets, no, that requires deep changes as Pierre was mentioning, in regulation, in standards. So we need to take some risks and play and share together, so we can really change the system and enable the circular economy.
Sonia, thank you for that. And you mentioned also the opportunity for this collaboration to unlock investment and financing for the in this case the bottle-to-bottle recycling solutions. Can you speak a little bit more to what that looked like in practice?
That's one of the key elements of everything, right? The companies have some budgets, of course, for sustainability, but not enough probably for achieving their goals or for really change the systems. So there are a lot of development institutions, public funds, money invested on this transition that we are all trying to do. And private companies can act as a bridge for this financing, because companies have normally history that can provide some robustness and some stability to this financial mechanism. And then it can provide, of course, expertise and practices, but it can allow also to have some governance, right? Sometimes in these transitions, you need many players, some of them small, SMEs, local recyclers, local players. So it's a lot of effort we can do together to exchange this, and the company could be the platform to unlock some of this financing and provide the right platform for de-risking some of these operations, because sometimes it's high risk, no? And they see recycling in a country and people are like, no, we're not gonna put money there. But if you have a company supporting that, the whole value chain of this company, not only the company itself, will really unlock and help to give some certainty.
Very good. Just maybe one quick follow-up question on the collaboration itself. You mentioned 10 partners and the complexity of it as well. How do you go about structuring the collaboration?
That's very important. Yeah, I mean, I said it's a bit painful sometimes. I think the most important thing is a shared goal, like really genuine commitment from all the parties, that it's beyond each company separately, no? And then choosing the right partners is critical. So you know who you are working with, and perhaps testing in a pilot phase some of the partners, and of course having the proper governance. So setting an MOU, governance routines, steer costs, roles and responsibilities, so everyone understands what they are supposed to do. And then very importantly, flexibility to adapt, because sometimes you enter in this partnership, you don't know how it's going to evolve or what challenges you will face. So you need to be able to have some flexibility and share understanding, sometimes to kind of speak the same language and understand the same terminology of things that sometimes is not so obvious.
Right, and that comes also back again to definition and standards, which is a recurring theme here. Great, I'll turn to Bintang Kananda next from Honor, a startup based in Indonesia working on reuse solutions, so a bit of a different solution space, but that's also, of course, explicitly picked up by the treaty, and a key one in terms of also reducing more upstream the need for single use. So maybe Bintang, if you could talk a little bit about sort of the diversity of solutions in that space and what you do, but also when you think about the treaty context, what are maybe some of the cross-cutting challenges across regions and solutions on reuse that at a regional and global level need to be addressed or supported? Bintang, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Christian. I hope my voice is clear. Yeah, nice to meet you all. So I think what we do, firstly, is that we basically provide a lot of daily needs in Indonesia, like very basic needs from rice to cooking oil in a milkman model. Probably that's what the best way we normally explain that, because I think in Europe or in the US, that's also common. And in Indonesia, that is also the same. So we deliver products in returnable packaging. Next time, people can return that in our drop points or directly to us when we, send or ship the next batch of products in new packaging. And I think what we've seen from this global plastic treaty progress is that what I've mentioned a couple of times, also to the World Economic Forum team, I think the ban is very crucial. I've seen that working very well in Indonesia when it comes to the ban of single-use plastic for shopping in mini markets and supermarkets. When it was in place, it's just systemic change directly. I think I've seen this is a possibility, especially for the very problematic packaging in Indonesia and probably other Southeast Asia countries like in Malaysia, Philippines, which is the multi-layer packaging. I think it is very hard to be, but it's also the collection of this formal sector is not really interested to collect this, so that there must be a way. Are you guys still hear me clear?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was a few
So-
seconds
so-
of, but we can hear you now.
Yeah, sorry, but yeah, so there must be a way to reduce this kind of problematic packaging, and I think to really push the industries that we should start from the ban of this problematic packaging in the first place, and then we can think about the solution, reuse, refill, or probably alternative packaging. But I think it is very important for me personally to push this kind of directive from this treaty that for this problematic packaging, there must be a mandatory way to sort of like limit that, or or pacing out by a certain period of year. Let's say the next 5 years, it must be phased out. I think, yeah, I'll stop there first. So that would be a breakthrough solution probably for this specific problematic packaging, especially in Indonesia.
Thank you, Bintang. And of course, the whole topic of problematic and avoidable plastic applications is a central negotiating topic in the treaty context, and also part of the intersessional work now that member states are looking at very closely. So, of course, there's sort of the carrots and sticks piece that you alluded to in terms of, bans or disincentivizing certain formats and solutions can create markets or opportunities for alternatives or new business models such as reuse. Can you maybe just elaborate a little bit? In the Indonesian case, you mentioned that the ban there, I believe, on plastic bags or others has sort of really fueled the demand, or at least the innovation in reuse solutions. Can you talk a little bit about that process and the timelines involved and how that unfolded?
Yeah, I think for the specific reuse solution, there's not that specific like in that plastic bag case, but I think that's more on what I hope for basically. But I think we can see from that example. But I think looking at the current situation or learnings that we've done in the past 4 years, we have seen that for example, geographical area that is more populated, like in Jakarta, for example, it is more ready, in our opinion, to, let's say, adopt the reuse solution first, because the characteristics of the density. Let's say we work with mom and pop stores as our drop points of packaging return, for example. So it is very widely available. Like there are millions of these mom and pop stores in Jakarta. So we work with them both as a sales points, but also as a drop points, and it also make the business case much more making sense in terms of like logistics, because one of the challenges of the reuse solution to be scale up is of course the logistics, because we're not just doing the forward logistics but also the reverse logistics. So I think maybe if I think I also talk about like the streamlining the targets. So probably we can choose the specific targets, choosing the city that is more ready to embrace this solution first, and then we make certain targets, be it cities or certain industry. Let's say takeaway food or consumer goods industry first, and then the later will follow. So I think that is more on the thing that we see that it could boost the implementation of reuse solutions, especially talking about like Indonesian region, to be more specific in Jakarta area.
Great. Maybe you can see it in the chat, Bintang. There's a question specifically on also consumer behavior. Maybe you can address that in the next round while I turn to Laurent Besson from Veolia in Indonesia. Thanks also, well, we'll stay in Indonesia, I guess, going from a startup to a bigger player, and your solution very much also a collaboration, Laurent, between Veolia and Danone Aqua, a cross-value chain collaboration to make recycling solutions viable and scalable. We'd love to hear from you what that solution looks like and how that collaboration came about. So Laurent, over to you.
Thanks, Christian. Yes, so Danone is a key account worldwide for Veolia, and I think without the partnership with Danone Aqua in Indonesia, I would probably not be speaking here tonight, and our plant would probably not be existing. Definitely securing a large volume of production with an offtake agreement was critical in the investment decisions that we made to build what is today still the largest PET recycling plant in Indonesia. Because as Sonia was mentioning earlier, tackling the plastic pollution is a joint effort, and it will require a lot of efforts from all stakeholders, consumers, governments, municipalities, brand owners, and the recyclers. And the fact that there is no legally binding obligations for big brands in Indonesia is not a blank check to use virgin plastic only. It's we see clearly that on the market, different brands have completely different approaches. And I have to say that, and to highlight that Danone Aqua has a long-term vision, that they have not deviated too much since the beginning, despite the challenges that all the recyclers faced, in particular last year on prices. And this is the kind of partner you want to work with, because that's a long-term commitments that allow recyclers to put quite a lot of money on investing on facilities that have a long-term return, and that will be contributing to that global roadmap and strategy.
Great, Laura. You mentioned the offtake agreement, and there's a lot of talk in the INC negotiation context around, the opportunity to set targets for recycled content and sort of enshrine more into either global or national markets the demand, right, for the solutions. Can you talk a little bit about what that what sort of the treaty, in your opinion, can do to build on those kind of examples and create a level playing field?
Yeah, I think by creating a stronger framework, and in particular on the minimum recycled content you mentioned, it will put what I would call the necessary pressure on brands, and also on some countries that are a bit behind or a bit late. And it's a pressure to innovate, a pressure to change their packaging approach, reducing over packaging, changing material, and to shift their focus to recycled resins. And this will create stronger commitments from brands that will have to do the right math, where the raw material cost is not only about buying the cheapest material, but it's also integrating the indirect cost of potentially penalties, the cost of circularity, and the cost to the environment. And that's where we're expecting the treaty to have a large impact.
Great. Thank you for that. I understand Susanne fixed her audio, and I want to go back to her. And thanks for the flexibility. We flipped it around, and it was great to maybe first hear some of the solutions and then go to the broader insights across a much larger set of solutions that were analyzed by the report. So let me maybe go back to her. But before I do, just maybe I want a rapid fire answer to a question that I'm inspired by from the chat right now that Mark posted, where you see, let's make it one opportunity for companies to better work together pre-competitively. Where would you see that main opportunity? Very like a one sentence answer each, or two max. Who wants to kick off from the group?
happy to go. I think one opportunity is around kind of like shaping those future legislations, very like aspirational. Sometimes there's a bit the worry that like things are going to come really quickly and you have to kind of like just adapt. So actually like being quite bold, especially in like a non-competitive group, of just kind of like saying, hey, we could be doing this if we had like the time to adapt and so on. That's a quite helpful way of thinking about the kind of change you want in the industry.
Great. Thanks, Pierre. Sonia, can I turn to you next?
Sure.
Very quickly.
Yeah, quickly. Yeah, I think the value chain of plastic particularly, it's composed by many SMEs parts. So we have big recyclers like Veolia, but in other countries it's very segmented market with very small recyclers, small collectors, aggregators. So we really need to engage them and include them in this value chain. So we make sure everyone is included and part of the chain and have develop the necessary capabilities to be part of the next type of packaging. Thank you.
Thank you. Bintang, you're next. You're muted.
Sorry. I think we have a very concrete example. We did a pilot in East Java with Systemic that we leverage their existing recycling collection to houses and then implement some reuse solutions. So, you know, like replacing certain type of packaging with their existing collection operation logistics. I think that could be an example.
Great. And Laurent, last but not least.
Yeah, I think one important point is we haven't mentioned too much. Digitalization is something that will allow the whole value chain to be one better, ensure that the value along the value chain is properly shared, and in particular downstream towards the waste pickers, the collectors, the aggregators that are doing the job, in particular in countries like Indonesia, and that the key actors of that full supply chain.
Great. Thank you all. We'll come back to the panel at the end. I see questions coming in. Do please, from the audience, keep posting. We had great questions on consumer behavior, on the role of SMEs, now on microplastics. Hopefully we can address most of that at the end. But for now, Suzanne, over to you for presentation on the key insights of the report. Thank you.
Yes, apologies for the hiccup that we had before, some echo that we didn't notice during the testing, but luckily it's solved now. So let me dive into where we were. So for the transformation towards a circular plastic economy, innovation is needed. And I think we heard some great examples already now just during the panel. But what we looked into with our study was seeking, okay, what are those elements that the case study providers highlight that the treaty can help speed up this S-curve of innovation? So shortening the time frame between pilot scale, moving towards big mainstreaming adaptation. And that's, there's two main factors that were highlighted. One is on the one hand, policy interventions, and the second one, access to finance. So we will dive into these two elements. In addition to that, there were some non-instrument related elements mentioned, which we also just heard about, multi-stakeholder collaborations, and we come to that a bit later. But maybe let's first deep dive on the policy side, because we've asked the interviewees what policies are relevant to them, and also said, okay, next to the relevance, what is the need for harmonization? Maybe if we can move to the next slides, because that's what the result was from this mapping. And I will briefly touch upon each of these. So if we look at where we see a high need and high relevance mentioned by the interviewees, as well as a high need for global harmonization, on the top right, we see definitions and standards. So that's a very important one. And some of those examples that came out during the interviews is, okay, what is the definition of plastic, an alternative plastic, a non-plastic substitute? And we already heard a bit of that in the discussion. But also, for example, standards around compostability or hygiene factors in reuse. And even though some of it might sound insignificant, it can mean a quite critical difference between what different policies are applicable to what materials in what applications. So for example, if an alternative material is to be considered a plastic or non-plastic, so what other elements of an instrument might be applicable, but also if there's an exemption for compostable plastics in a certain application, then a golden test or standard of how that should be tested is quite crucial to come to these. Well, another factor that was frequently mentioned is extended producer responsibility. Can we please go back to the previous slide? Yes. So where we see a great ask for harmonizations, especially for those companies that have products in multiple jurisdictions, because yeah, they won't necessarily change that much per jurisdiction. But also clarity again on what is included in EPR, so that it's more than only a collection for recycling, but maybe also reuse elements, prevention, etc., being implemented. Bans that was also briefly touched upon in the panel, and these are considered highly relevant, especially when it comes to speed, right? Because a ban could really significantly speed up some of those innovation S-curve. But the interviewees were a bit in the middle on whether or not that also needs to be globally harmonized. And one of the arguments on the one hand is avoiding like having problematic plastics flooding countries without a ban. But on the other hand, there was also mentioned the need for a tailor-made approach based on different infrastructure systems, applications, and circumstances that could lead to some plastics and applications being more problematic in one jurisdiction than in another. Another one where there was a lesser need for global harmonization is when it comes down to target setting on the different R strategies. And with the different R strategies, we mean reduction, reuse, recycling. And let me be very clear, all the solution providers that we interviewed, they mentioned, okay, there's not one solution, there's not one silver bullet that is going to do it all. Instead, we really need to have a combination of all of these different strategies and types of solutions. And that means we need to make sure that we secure enough effort on each of these R steps, right? So have targets on reduction, on reuse, and on recycling, like all of them, to make sure that none of these is underutilized or overestimated. But then on the other hand, there was this notion by many of the interviewees that it might differ per country and even within a country. For example, having a difference in a big city versus a small island, of how this combination of different R strategies should come together. And finally, the one that you see on the bottom end, where there was still a high need for global harmonization, is on safety and having clear quality regulations. And this also really helps with gaining trust by customers and clients in some of new alternative solutions, but also for conventional materials to make sure that it's safe and the quality is sufficient and the supply is sufficient for the applications that it's used. So maybe let's then move towards the next important factor that was mentioned, and that's access to finance. And I think generally speaking, all the solution providers were able to get access to finance to bring their solution to a certain initial scale. And if we look at where this finance was coming from, it was mainly coming from private investment at 42%, followed by roughly 1/5 of philanthropic funding and another 16% of government funding. And only 5% came from EPR and another 5% from blended finance. And actually all of the solution providers mentioned that they need more finance, right? So they really need access to more finance to scale. And then actually it's quite interesting if we ask, okay, where does that additional finance need to come from? And then we see the picture shifting a bit, with more than 20% mentioning EPR and another 20% blended finance, and none looking at purely governmental funding, right? So really combined into this blended finance. And also 36% mentioned private investment other than EPR as an important mechanism. So I think this shows a very strong reliance on private investment for scaling. But then if we had the conversations to go a bit further, like, okay, and what is needed to unlock this this private investment? And then most of the solution providers see a very clear role for the treaty to come up with clear policies, and also the countries, of course, that ultimately need to ratify the treaty to ensure enforcement of policies that turn into national legislation, to drive the unlocking of private investment, to really make sure that it becomes less risky, de-risked for investors to invest in those solutions, but also relatively, of course, to conventional alternatives, right? So if there you see an increase of externalities in the pricing, then you get this different playing field and more level playing field for those circular industry solutions. So as already briefly mentioned, in addition to sort of these direct asks and ideas and views of the policy of the industry solution providers on what the treaty could directly influence, there were also some indirect elements. So if we move on, yes, there. So one of the things that was mentioned is multi-stakeholder collaborations. And basically all of the solutions that we interviewed, and also which we just heard in the panel, they came about through multi-stakeholder collaborations, different parties along the value chain between different sectors, public, private, coming together and set up this collaboration around this solution. There was also some critique. So I quote one of the interviewees that said, okay, multi-stakeholder collaboration is an overutilized expression and underutilized in terms of action. So talking about multi-stakeholder collaboration is not enough, and we really need to do it. And I think we've just saw some great examples of that, but also in the report, there's many more of those examples. But it's very important to highlight the need of multi-stakeholder collaboration also going forward with creating more solutions and scaling these kind of solutions. And yeah, of course, the process towards a global plastic treaty, as well as the implementation after, could also nurture this multi-stakeholder collaboration. And the second element, and that's slightly related to this, is building trust. So trust was mentioned many, many times by the interviewees. We also see sometimes that there's certain champions, right, that had a huge trust in it and really took this project off, but also enabling trust along the value chain that is needed for this multi-stakeholder collaboration, gaining trust from clients and customers and the end consumer that this alternative is safe, but also is better for the environment, right? And there's again, that links back a bit to the need for clear standards and definitions, also to avoid, for example, greenwashing in that area. So building trust was mentioned many times as well. And finally, increasing awareness. And yeah, that was quite interesting as well, because most of the interviewees said, yeah, in the last 5 to 8 years, we saw a huge spur in terms of increase in awareness about plastic pollution. Of course, the treaty negotiations gained even more attention towards it. And maybe for some of us that live in this in the bubble that are closely related to working on an everyday basis with some of those plastic pollution challenges and solutions, might think there's a lot of awareness raising, but quite a bit of them still highlighted that there's still gaps in there and that there's more awareness raising further needed across the globe in different areas, but also on those new solutions, right? So maybe we have a lot of awareness already around the problem, but what about the solutions? Do we have enough awareness of what are all different possibilities there? So I think with that, I want to conclude the summary of what we see in the report, and please feel free to share questions in the chat. We will do our best to answer them meanwhile.
Thank you, Susanne. Yes, absolutely. Please do put questions also on the report or the findings in the chat. And I think just echoing also what Susanne just said at the end, that there is a lot of awareness around the issues and the problems, often less about the solutions and their needs to scale. And I think that's exactly what today's webinar is about, and also the report really tries to achieve. Thanks for those who have already shared questions in the chat, and we'll have a few minutes left to maybe touch on some of them. Bintang already answered some of the consumer behavior questions, and maybe I want to pick out a couple here for the panel to reflect on. The first, maybe the issue of greenwashing came up, and also unintended consequences of solutions that are prompted by bans or you know, maybe falsely incentivizing or incentivizing solutions that have unintended consequences. In the reuse space, being an alternative to single use, but also in the substitute material space, of course, that is an ongoing question. And maybe it would be great for Bintang and Pierre to briefly comment on this question in terms of the Indonesian and Dutch context that you mentioned, how specifically the unintended consequences in greenwashing piece has sort of been dealt with, and what lessons we can learn from those processes. So maybe Bintang and then Pierre.
Yeah, so the question is more on the unintended consequences, right, Kristen? Just, yeah. I think the question was on point. I saw that as well happening in Indonesia, but I think that's where we should focus on the next targets. For example, let's say when we ban something, there's a specification on the target, like let's say the takeaway restaurant should provide options for reusable, for example. I think that would be helpful, and we also work with the Ministry of Environment here to lay out until 2030 which kind of first industry, let's say the hotel restaurants, would have to provide let's say reusable or returnable solutions after the single-use plastic bags, for example, has been banned. So there must be a complementary targets, I would say, after the ban is in place. And I think for this specific single-use plastic bag is not the case, and I think it is great learning as well. And I've seen that several regulatory bodies, including the Ministry of Environment, is working with several industry players to find out like what would be the next steps to to solve this kind of unintended consequences.
In our side, I think it's a very kind of like interesting and important question. Sometimes we tend to kind of like apply more scrutiny to innovative solutions than to plastic itself. I mean, like microplastics are like a real kind of like terrible pollution that we're unleashing on our oceans. And so we are kind of like sometimes looking at like what could go wrong with alternatives that are already like so much better than what we are kind of like letting go freely in the market. That being said, I think it's really important to look at the long-term kind of like impact of any material that's going to be used in replacement for plastic. So to us, it's really like science-based. We need to have kind of like the right evidences and work with kind of like leading kind of like academic bodies to be able to provide reassurance that an alternative substitute is going to be able to deliver at a significant lower kind of like impact on the environment. That's why, for example, seaweed that grows up to 1 meter per day, doesn't require freshwater fertilizer, pesticides, MGOs, has a really good kind of like position in that list. But it's not the only biomass that like potentially can help us reduce the pressure on like plastic production. And I think in terms of kind of like the consequences of unintended consequences and greenwashing on the other end, like when we are not strong with our kind of like our definitions, we actually have kind of like the lack of incentive for actually going further. And so in our case in the Netherlands, they reviewed more than 900 solutions on the market that were all claiming different things from plastic free to kind of like plant-based to kind of like made with kind of like biomass, etc., etc. And like all of them were found to contain plastic. So it really shows that the industry was quite kind of like comfortable with these little white lies that have kind of like allow them to kind of like market their products with maybe not the level of delivery that was expected from consumers. And until like all of this is governed by industry regulations rather than like government regulation. So there's a few kind of like certification schemes and like seals of approvals, but like those are for the industry by the industry. And so, yeah, like until the government checks in with like independent third parties, you have kind of like a real lack of incentive to kind of like go above and beyond what is currently working as a business.
Yeah. No, thank you. And of course, the scientific analysis is also a big question at the global level in building capacity, also in developing countries on that front, which is a big challenge. It's a big topic, and this evidence base needs to be there. I'm conscious of time. We have 2 minutes. I would have loved to address the SME question with our colleagues also from the bigger companies, because here we have sort of the startups and the corporates, and there's a big chunk in between. But we'll get around to that in the next webinar, because I'm very conscious of time and want to make sure we do finish on time. So apologies for not getting back to Sonia and Laurent, but more opportunities to come, and please do reach out. We'll also capture your questions and report back after the webinar to everyone. I just want to thank, first of all, the panelists today and KPMG and the team for the collaboration, but also all the other solution providers that contributed to the study. And of course, we didn't get around to highlighting today, but we'll do so at other points in the future. And yeah, I just want to encourage everyone to, of course, look at the report here, the QR codes, and we look now towards the end of the global treaty negotiation window, and are excited, of course, to see what comes out of the negotiations end of the year and how some of those solutions can benefit, hopefully, from an ambitious and implementable treaty outcome. So with that, thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your evening, night, day, afternoon, morning. Thank you very much for joining today.